The United States of America did not rise quietly. It was forged through resistance, shaped by survival, and defined by constant change. In a relatively short span of history, it transformed from distant colonies into a global power, a transformation that would alter not only a nation, but the world itself. Yet this story does not begin with independence. It does not begin with revolution. It begins far earlier, before borders, before flags, before the very idea of the United States existed. Long before European ships reached these shores, North America was already home. For thousands of years, the continent supported a vast mosaic of indigenous societies. Modern archaeology and anthropology suggest that the earliest inhabitants arrived during the last ice age, crossing a frozen land bridge that once connected Asia to North America through what is now the Bering Strait. As the planet warmed and glaciers melted, rising seas submerged this land bridge forever. Those who had crossed were left isolated, adapting to an entirely new world. Over generations, these early peoples spread across forests, plains, deserts, and coastlines. They did not remain nomadic forever. Instead, they evolved, developing agriculture, trade networks, political systems, and belief structures deeply connected to the land they inhabited. In the river valleys of the Midwest, the Mississippian culture constructed large ceremonial mounds and organized urban centers supported by farming and long-distance trade. In the arid Southwest, Pueblo societies engineered complex stone villages designed to endure extreme climates. Farther northeast, a powerful political alliance emerged, the Iroquois Confederacy, uniting multiple nations under a shared system of governance based on consensus and collective responsibility. These societies were sophisticated, resilient, and deeply rooted. They were not waiting to be discovered. European awareness of this continent developed slowly. While Norse explorers briefly reached North America around the 11th century, their settlements were short-lived and soon abandoned. For centuries afterward, Europe's attention remained fixed eastward, toward Asia and the lucrative trade routes that connected civilizations through the Silk Road. This focus changed dramatically in the mid-15th century, when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453. Traditional land routes to Asia became increasingly restricted. European powers were forced to look elsewhere toward the sea. In 1492, an ambitious navigator sailing under the Spanish crown set out across the Atlantic Ocean. Christopher Columbus believed he had reached the outskirts of Asia. Instead, he initiated sustained contact between Europe and an entirely unknown continent. Columbus's voyages reshaped world history, but not without devastating consequences. European arrival brought violence, forced labor, and foreign diseases to indigenous populations who had no immunity to illnesses such as smallpox and measles. Within a few generations, entire communities collapsed. It is estimated that up to 90% of indigenous populations in some regions perished, not primarily through warfare but through disease. The world had been irreversibly connected. As news of this new world spread, European powers moved quickly to secure territory and wealth. Spain established dominance across the Caribbean and Central and South America. France explored vast inland regions, forming alliances through trade rather than large-scale settlement. The Dutch, driven by commerce, built profitable trading posts along major rivers. England entered the competition cautiously but with lasting impact. In 1607, English settlers established Jamestown in present-day Virginia. The colony struggled at first, facing starvation, disease, and internal conflict. Survival depended heavily on indigenous knowledge and fragile cooperation. Eventually, Jamestown found economic stability through tobacco cultivation. The crop proved highly profitable and deeply transformative. Plantations expanded rapidly. Labor demands increased. Indentured servants arrived from Europe, trading years of work for passage and opportunity. Soon after, enslaved Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic in brutal conditions, laying the foundation for a system that would define American history for centuries. economic growth came at a human cost. As European settlements expanded, relationships with native nations grew increasingly strained. The fur trade became a central driver of conflict. Beaver pelts were in high demand in Europe, and native groups found themselves drawn into imperial rivalries. Firearms exchanged for furs altered power balances between tribes. Competition over hunting grounds intensified. Entire regions were destabilized by cycles of alliance, betrayal, and warfare. Where was this more evident than in the struggle between French and British interests in North America? By the mid-18th century, tensions erupted into open conflict over control of the Ohio River Valley. What began as a regional dispute escalated into the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the global 7 Years' War. Britain ultimately emerged victorious, gaining control over vast territories previously claimed by France. But victory came at a staggering financial cost. To recover from wartime debt, the British government turned to its American colonies. New taxes were imposed, first on sugar, then on printed materials through the Stamp Act. For the colonists, this crossed a line. They argued that taxation without representation violated their rights as English subjects. Protests erupted. British goods were boycotted. Tensions rose steadily. Though Parliament repealed some taxes, others followed, including duties on essential imports such as tea and glass. British troops were deployed to enforce order, particularly in Boston. In March 1770, a confrontation between civilians and soldiers turned deadly. Shots were fired. 5 colonists were killed. The incident would be remembered as the Boston Massacre. Public outrage spread quickly. 3 years later, resistance escalated. Disguised as Native Americans, members of a secret group known as the Sons of Liberty boarded British ships and dumped cargoes of tea into Boston Harbor. The British response was swift and severe. Massachusetts lost its right to self-government. Troops flooded the city. The colonies interpreted these measures as punishment and preparation for something worse. Across the countryside, militias began drilling. Weapons were stockpiled. A confrontation now seemed inevitable. In 1774, colonial leaders gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. They sought reconciliation, but also prepared for resistance. Britain chose force. On the night of April 18, 1775, British troops marched toward the towns of Lexington and Concord to seize colonial weapons and arrest rebel leaders. Riders spread the alarm through the countryside. At dawn, armed colonists confronted British soldiers. Shots were fired. The American Revolutionary War had begun. What followed was not a quick rebellion, but a prolonged struggle against the most powerful empire of the age. The Second Continental Congress formed a unified army and appointed George Washington as its commander. Despite limited resources and training, colonial forces resisted British advances. Early battles were costly. British victories came at heavy losses. The war dragged on. Then, in July 1776, the colonies took a decisive step. Thomas Jefferson drafted a declaration that severed ties with Britain entirely. On July 4th, the colonies proclaimed themselves independent. There would be no turning back. Independence, however, did not bring immediate peace. The declaration had been signed, but the war was far from over. The British Empire still commanded the strongest navy and a professional army. The American forces, by contrast, were undertrained, poorly supplied, and often outnumbered. What they lacked in resources, they compensated for with determination and geography. The war shifted constantly. Cities fell and were reclaimed. Armies marched, retreated, and marched again. In 1777, a turning point emerged in upstate New York. American forces captured a major British army near Saratoga. The victory sent a powerful signal across the Atlantic. The rebellion was no longer a lost cause. France, eager to weaken its longtime rival Britain, openly entered the war on the American side. Spain soon followed. Supplies, funding, naval support, and experienced officers began flowing to the Continental Army. The conflict transformed from a colonial rebellion into an international war.
Years of fighting drained both sides. By 1781, British forces found themselves cornered at Yorktown, Virginia. Surrounded by American troops on land and the French Navy at sea, escape was impossible. The surrender at Yorktown effectively ended the war. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris formally recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation's borders stretched to the Mississippi River. A revolution had succeeded, but the experiment was only beginning. The early United States faced immediate challenges. The first system of government, the Articles of Confederation, created a weak central authority. States acted largely independently. Economic instability and internal unrest followed. Leaders recognized that survival required change. In 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia to draft a new framework of government. The result was the United States Constitution, a system built on checks and balances, designed to prevent tyranny while maintaining unity. Ratified in 1788, it was soon followed by the Bill of Rights, guaranteeing individual freedoms such as speech, religion, and due process. In 1789, George Washington became the nation's first president. The United States had established not just independence, but identity. International pressures soon returned. France, burdened by debt from supporting the American war effort, descended into revolution. As France and Britain entered renewed conflict, the young United States attempted to remain neutral. Tensions escalated when French forces began attacking American merchant ships. The U.S. responded by strengthening its navy, leading to an undeclared naval conflict known as the Quasi War. Amid these challenges, opportunity emerged. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson negotiated the purchase of Louisiana from France for $15 million. The deal doubled the nation's size overnight. To understand this vast new territory, Jefferson authorized an expedition westward. Led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the journey mapped rivers, documented wildlife, and established diplomatic contact with indigenous nations. The United States now looked west. Expansion was not peaceful. In 1812, unresolved tensions with Britain erupted into war once again. Though neither side gained territory, the conflict hardened American identity. British forces even burned Washington, including the White House, a humiliation that fueled national resolve. In the decades that followed, the idea of manifest destiny took hold. The belief that the United States was destined to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This belief carried consequences. Native American tribes in the southeastern states were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. Under President Andrew Jackson, thousands were relocated westward in brutal conditions. Many died from disease, starvation, and exhaustion along what became known as the Trail of Tears. Expansion continued regardless. To the southwest, tensions with Mexico escalated. American settlers flooded into Texas, eventually rebelling against Mexican authority. Texas briefly became an independent republic before being annexed by the United States in 1845. War followed. The Mexican-American War ended in decisive American victory. The United States acquired vast new territories, including California, the Southwest. Soon after, gold was discovered in California. Hundreds of thousands rushed west, transforming the region almost overnight. California achieved statehood, and the nation's economy surged. But beneath the growth, a deep division widened. The question of slavery haunted every new territory and state. Northern states industrialized rapidly, while southern states relied heavily on enslaved labor. Political compromises delayed conflict, but could not prevent it. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, Southern leaders feared the future of slavery. One by one, Southern states seceded from the Union. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. The American Civil War had begun. The conflict was brutal and modern. Railroads transported troops. Telegraphs relayed commands instantly. Ironclad warships and repeating rifles reshaped combat. Though the Union possessed greater resources, Confederate forces were led by skilled commanders and fought with fierce determination. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring freedom for enslaved people in Confederate territories. The war now carried a moral purpose alongside political survival. That same year, Union and Confederate armies clashed at Gettysburg. The battle lasted 3 days and claimed tens of thousands of lives. It marked a turning point. The Confederacy never fully recovered. In April 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. The Union was preserved. Slavery was abolished through the 13th Amendment. Days later, President Lincoln was assassinated. Victory came at a heavy cost. The nation entered a period of rebuilding and reconciliation. Railroads expanded. Industry grew. New states joined the Union. Yet conflict persisted. As settlers moved westward, native lands were increasingly encroached upon. Wars erupted across the plains. In 1876, resistance peaked during the Great Sioux War. The frontier closed, but tensions endured. By the late 19th century, the United States turned outward. In 1898, following the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, the U.S. declared war on Spain. The conflict was brief but transformative. Spain lost its remaining empire. The United States gained Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Cuba became independent under American influence. The nation had become an imperial power. President Theodore Roosevelt asserted American influence across Latin America and oversaw the construction of the Panama Canal, a strategic link between oceans. In 1914, war engulfed Europe. The United States initially remained neutral, but German submarine attacks on American shipping and a secret proposal urging Mexico to attack the U.S. changed public opinion. In 1917, America entered World War I. Fresh troops tipped the balance. The war ended in Allied victory, though at enormous human cost. The 1920s brought rapid change, economic growth, cultural innovation, and technological progress. Jazz flourished, Hollywood rose, women gained the right to vote. Then, in 1929, the stock market collapsed. The Great Depression devastated the nation. Recovery was slow and interrupted by another global conflict. In 1941, Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States entered World War II. American industry mobilized at unprecedented scale. The nation fought across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. Fearing Nazi atomic research, the U.S. launched the Manhattan Project. In 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. World War II ended, but a new era began. The world emerged divided. The United States and the Soviet Union became rival superpowers. NATO and the Warsaw Pact formed opposing alliances. The Cold War unfolded through proxy conflicts, espionage, and ideological struggle. Competition extended beyond Earth. In 1969, American astronauts landed on the moon. The space race symbolized technological dominance. At home, the nation confronted its own inequalities. The civil rights movement challenged segregation and discrimination. Through nonviolent resistance, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. reshaped American society. At the dawn of the 21st century, a single date altered history. September 11, 2001. Terrorist attacks struck New York and Washington, killing thousands. The nation responded with unity and with war. The consequences reshaped global politics, security, and surveillance. Today, the United States remains a leading global power. Its influence reaches across military, economic, technological, and cultural spheres. Yet its story is unfinished. It is a nation born in revolution, tested by division, strengthened by resilience, and constantly redefining itself. History does not end. It continues.